The morning she told me I wasn't allowed to bring street fruit into her house, I didn't argue. I just nodded, packed my basket back into the car, and drove to the office I hadn't visited in 6 weeks. My assistant looked surprised to see me. "Mrs. Elaine, is everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat down at my desk, the same desk where I'd signed the purchase agreement for the shopping center in 2003, and I pulled up the tenant directory. I scrolled slowly, the way you do when you already know what you're going to find, but you need to see it with your own eyes anyway. There she was. Unit 214. Vanessa Renee Carter. Boutique retail lease. Signed 8 days ago. Rent already 3 weeks from its first due date. She had mocked me in my son's kitchen without ever knowing that every square foot of her new dream stood on ground that belonged to me. I didn't call my son that night. I called my lawyer. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something about me. I'm not a vengeful woman. I've never been. But there are moments in life when silence stops being patience and starts being permission. And I was done giving permission. So if you're here, stay with me. And if this story touches something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be heard. Now let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Elaine. I'm 63 years old. I'm a widow, a mother, and, depending on who you ask, either a woman who sells fruit on the side of the road or the sole owner of a commercial real estate portfolio worth several $1,000,000. The truth is, I'm both. And the fact that my own daughter-in-law never thought to wonder which one tells you everything you need to know about how she saw me. I lost my husband, Robert, 7 years ago. Heart attack. No warning. No slow decline. No hospital bed with time to say goodbye. One Saturday morning, we were sitting at the kitchen table. I was cutting papaya. He was reading the paper. And the next moment, he was on the floor, and the papaya was in my lap, and the paramedics were telling me what I already knew. Robert was a contractor. A builder. The kind of man who could look at a piece of land and see what it was going to become 10 years from now. But Robert didn't have patience for paperwork. He didn't have patience for negotiations, for tenants who paid late, for lawyers who talked in circles. That was me. That was always me. We bought our first commercial property together in 1998. A rundown strip of storefronts near the old bus terminal that nobody wanted. I found the listing. I ran the numbers. I sat across from the seller and negotiated a price that Robert said was borderline robbery. He built it up. I kept the books. We were a team in the truest sense, not because we split everything equally, but because we each did the part the other couldn't. By 2003, we owned the shopping center. It was a big deal for us, the biggest purchase we'd ever made. I remember sitting at my desk the day we signed the papers, my hands shaking just slightly as I wrote my name next to Robert's. By 2010, we had 3 commercial buildings and a warehouse lot. Everything structured through our LLC. Joint ownership. Clean paperwork. No loose ends. When Robert died, everything passed to me. Not through a will. Not through probate. Through the way we built it, side by side, name by name, signature by signature. I kept it all running. Quietly. Efficiently. Without fanfare. I had a property manager, Gerald, who had been with us for 15 years. I had a lawyer, Diane, who handled anything that needed legal attention. I reviewed quarterly reports at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a highlighter. I wasn't a silent owner. I was a quiet one. There's a difference. My son, Marcus, knew we had some properties. That's how Robert always described it to him, casually, like it was a hobby. Marcus never asked for details. And after Robert died, I never pushed them on him. Maybe I should have. Maybe if he'd understood what his mother spent her life building, things would have gone differently. But I was grieving, and Marcus was grown, and I told myself there would be time. And then there was the fruit. I had always grown fruit in the backyard. Mangoes, guavas, limes, papayas. Robert built me a garden, real garden beds, irrigation, a little stone path between the rows. He said it was my retirement project, even though neither of us ever really retired. After he died, that garden became my sanctuary. I would wake up before the sun and walk through the rows, checking the leaves, testing the soil, picking whatever was right. It was the quietest part of my day and the most honest. I started selling at a roadside stand on Saturday mornings. Not for the money. I didn't need the money. I did it for the faces. For the woman who came every week for limes. For the old man who told me my guavas reminded him of his mother's kitchen in Trinidad. For my granddaughter, Sophie, Robert's granddaughter from his first marriage, who painted the signs by hand and sat with me on a folding chair, doing her homework between customers. The fruit stand was never a business. It was a heartbeat. And now Vanessa had turned it into something to be ashamed of. Let me tell you about Marcus before Vanessa. Because the man she married was not the man I raised, or maybe he was, and I just didn't want to see the parts of him that bent so easily. After Robert died, I was the one who held things together. Marcus was in his last year of business school, and I pulled the tuition from a property sale I didn't need to make, just so he wouldn't have to take on more debt. I co-signed his first apartment lease. When he started a small business that failed within 18 months, I was the one who gave him $40,000 to try again. He said it was for a new opportunity. I didn't ask for a business plan. I didn't ask for collateral. I handed my son the money because that's what mothers do. He never paid it back. I never asked. Every Sunday I cooked for him. Oxtail, rice and peas, fried plantain, fresh juice from the garden. I kept his father's memory alive, photo albums on the coffee table, stories over dinner, a bench in the garden with Robert's name carved into the wood. I was holding space for both of us. And Marcus let me. He sat in that space and ate the food and listened to the stories and never once asked me how I was really doing. He wasn't a bad son. I need to say that clearly. He was a quiet son. A passive son. The kind of man who becomes whoever the closest person needs him to be. And for a long time, that closest person was me. Then he met Vanessa. She was sharp, confident, well-dressed. She had opinions about everything and the kind of smile that made you feel like she was doing you a favor just by being in the room. Marcus was captivated. I understood that. I didn't begrudge him falling in love, but I noticed the shift almost immediately, the way he started checking with her before answering questions, the way he stopped finishing his sentences when she walked into the room, the way he began seeing me through her eyes instead of his own. I told myself it was natural. A man changes when he falls in love, but I didn't expect the change to feel like erasure. The first 6 months after the wedding were a steady and slow repositioning. It started with small things. Vanessa rearranged the seating at Sunday dinner so that I was no longer next to Marcus. She put me at the end of the table, near the kitchen doorway, like I was closer to the help than the family. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe she just wanted to sit next to her husband. That's fair. That's normal. Then she forgot to tell me about a family barbecue until the morning of. I showed up with a dish I'd been cooking since 5 a.m. and found that the table was already full. There was no place set for me. Vanessa looked surprised, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Oh, I thought Marcus told you it was a small thing. Marcus was across the yard, flipping burgers. He didn't look up. Then came the corrections. Vanessa started correcting my English in front of guests. Not cruelly, never cruelly. Always with that thin smile, that helpful tone. I think you mean fewer, not less, Elaine. It's supposedly, not supposably. She'd laugh lightly afterward, like she was smoothing it over. But the guests would glance at me, and I could feel the air shift. She suggested I didn't need to bring food anymore. We have a meal plan now, she said, as though my oxtail was disrupting her system. She started declining my calls and texting back hours later with short, efficient messages. She stopped using the word mom. I became Elaine. And then the comments about the fruit stand began. At first, they were wrapped in concern. Aren't you too old to be standing in the sun all morning? Then they became jokes. Mom's little side hustle, Marcus said once, grinning at Vanessa like he'd told a clever joke. She laughed. I smiled. Inside, something pulled tight, like a thread being drawn across a wound. Then Vanessa started calling it the cart. It was not a cart. It was a proper stand, a canopy, a table, a cash box, and those hand-painted signs Sophie made for me with watercolors and love. But to Vanessa, it was a cart. Something quaint. Something embarrassing. Something that needed to be mentioned with a slight eye roll or a pitying tilt of the head. Each moment alone was small enough to dismiss, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I was being repositioned in my own family, not with cruelty, with efficiency. I was being moved from the center to the margin, from matriarch to inconvenience. Then came the dinner party. Vanessa hosted it on a Friday evening. Her parents were in town, her mother, her father, her sister, her brother-in-law. I was invited, but I could tell it was obligatory. When I arrived, the table was beautifully set. Candles, cloth napkins, fresh flowers. My seat was at the far end, next to an empty chair that was eventually filled by Vanessa's brother-in-law, who spent most of the evening on his phone. During dinner, Vanessa's mother turned to me with a polite smile and asked, "And what do you do, Elaine?" Before I could open my mouth, Vanessa answered for me. "She has a little fruit stand. It's cute." Her sister laughed, a short, reflexive laugh, the kind that escapes before you decide whether something is actually funny. Marcus stared at his plate. I smiled politely, the way I'd learned to, and said nothing. I watched Vanessa's mother nod slowly, the way you nod when someone tells you something you find mildly sad. I felt the weight of that nod in my chest for the rest of the evening. A few weeks later, I brought a basket of mangoes to the house. My best batch, the ones that had ripened perfectly on the tree, golden and heavy and warm from the sun. I'd wrapped the basket in cellophane with a ribbon. I set it on the counter when I arrived and told Vanessa it was for her. She glanced at it. "Oh, thanks." She didn't open it. She didn't touch the ribbon. She set it on the counter the way you set down junk mail. When I left that evening, I saw the basket sitting by the back door, next to the recycling bin, untouched. The ribbon still tied. I picked it up on my way out. I didn't say anything. I put it in the passenger seat and sat in the car for a full minute before starting the engine. I wasn't crying. I was doing something else, something quieter and more dangerous than crying. Something inside me shifted. Not rage. Not grief. Clarity. I realized I had been apologizing for myself in a house that was built on my generosity. I had been shrinking in a doorway that my money helped open. And no one, not Vanessa, not Marcus, had ever once stopped to wonder what I might be holding back. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing my quarterly property report. I do this every 3 months, a habit from the early days with Robert. I go through tenant lists, rent payments, maintenance flags, lease renewals. It's methodical, almost meditative. I use a highlighter and a cup of ginger tea. I was scanning the new tenant list for the shopping center when I saw the name. Vanessa Renee Carter. Unit 214. Boutique retail lease. Signed 12 days ago. I read it twice, then a third time. I set the highlighter down and sat very still. Vanessa had never mentioned opening a boutique. Not once. Not at dinner, not in passing, not in any of the conversations where she talked about investing in herself or working on a new project. Marcus hadn't mentioned it either. Not a word. I checked the lease terms. Standard commercial agreement. Mid-range rent. 60-day grace window. The approval chain showed Gerald's signature, routine processing. Vanessa would have dealt with the leasing office directly. There was no reason she would know who owned the building. No reason she'd ever think to ask. I set the report down slowly and looked out the window at the garden. The mango tree was heavy with fruit. Robert had planted it the year we bought the shopping center. It had grown tall and generous, the way things do when you tend to them quietly and don't expect applause. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Not hurt. Leverage. And with it came a question that cut deeper than anything Vanessa had ever said to me. Did Marcus know? Did he help her get this lease? And if he did he deliberately keep it from his mother? I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I'm not built that way. Robert used to say I had the patience of a woman who grew fruit for a living. I understood that most things reveal themselves if you give them enough time and enough sunlight. So instead of reacting, I started watching. At the next Sunday dinner, I listened differently. I wasn't there for the food or the conversation. I was there for information. Vanessa mentioned a new project casually, the way she always did, vague, important sounding, designed to impress without inviting questions. Marcus changed the subject quickly, almost nervously. I noticed new things around the house. A designer ring on Vanessa's finger. A handbag I'd never seen before, still creased from the box. New furniture in the guest room. Vanessa kept using a phrase that I now heard differently. Investing in myself. I asked, gently, the way a mother asks when she already knows the answer. What kind of project, dear? Vanessa smiled. That tight, tolerant smile she reserved for moments when she thought I was overstepping. Just something small. You wouldn't understand. I nodded. I took a sip of my drink, and I didn't say another word about it. The following Tuesday, I drove past the shopping center. I parked across the street and looked at Unit 214. There was a new sign in the window, a boutique name written in gold cursive. The lights were on inside. Workers were moving through the space. Even from the car, I could see it was expensive. Custom shelving, marble flooring, and hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room, a chandelier. Crystal. Oversized. The kind of fixture you put in a space when you want people to look up and feel impressed. I sat there for a long time. I went home and checked my personal records. 3 years ago, Marcus had borrowed $40,000 from me. He'd called it a business opportunity. He'd been vague about the details, and I hadn't pressed. I gave him the money because he was my son and he asked and I had it. He never paid it back. I never mentioned it. Now I sat at my kitchen table and wondered if my money, my $40,000, was hanging from the ceiling of Unit 214 in the form of that crystal chandelier. I needed to be sure. I called Gerald the next morning. Gerald has managed my properties for 15 years. He knew Robert. He came to the funeral. He sends me a Christmas card every December with a handwritten note. I trust Gerald the way you trust someone who has never once given you a reason not to. I asked him about the Unit 214 lease. Who applied? What financials were submitted? Who the guarantor was? Gerald pulled the file while I waited. I could hear him turning pages. The primary tenant is Vanessa Carter, he said. Standard application. Credit was acceptable. The personal guarantor on the lease is. He paused. Marcus Carter. I closed my eyes. Gerald, I said quietly, did Marcus mention at any point during the process that his mother is the building's owner? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that answers the question before the words do. No, Mrs. Elaine. He didn't. I thanked him and hung up. I sat with it for a long time. I sat in the chair by the window where Robert used to read, and I let the truth settle over me like something heavy and cold. My own son, the boy I raised, the man I funded, the person I cooked for every Sunday and never stopped loving even when his silence cut me, had guaranteed a lease on my property without telling me. He either didn't know I owned the building, which meant he had never once paid attention to what his mother built with her life, or he did know, and he hid it deliberately, because it was easier to let his wife mock me than to tell her the truth. I wasn't sure which possibility hurt more. I picked up the phone again. This time, I called my lawyer. Tayanne has handled my legal affairs since Robert's death. She's precise, careful, and she doesn't waste words. When I walked into her office 2 days later with a folder of documents, she could see on my face that this wasn't a routine visit. I laid everything out. The lease, the guarantor paperwork, the property records, the quarterly report, the timeline of disrespect. I didn't dramatize it. I just told her the facts, one after another. The way I'd learned to present things after decades of managing tenants and contracts and people who tried to take advantage of what they thought was softness. Tayanne reviewed it all carefully. Then she looked up at me. Elaine, you are the sole owner of this shopping center through your LLC. The lease is valid, but it's a standard commercial agreement. Vanessa has a 60-day grace window, after which full rent is due monthly. If she defaults, you can begin termination proceedings with 30 days' notice. She turned a page. Build out the marble flooring, the structural modifications. I'd need to review whether those were formally approved through the proper channels. If they weren't, that's a separate issue. Then she told me something I hadn't fully considered. The lease gave me the right to approve or deny subletting, signage changes, and business modifications within the unit. I had operational oversight. I didn't just own the building. I had authority over how every space inside it was used. Dan set the papers down and looked at me directly. What do you want to do? I took a breath. I don't want to destroy her business. I want her to understand who she's been talking to. And I want my son to remember who raised him. And how do you want to do that? I want to wait, I said. Just a little longer. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Vanessa dig herself in deeper with every passing day. She hosted a soft launch for the boutique. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from Sophie, who saw the photos online. Vanessa had posted them everywhere, the chandelier lit up, the gold signage gleaming, the racks of clothes arranged like art. One photo had a caption that I read 3 times. Built this from nothing. Self-made. Self-made. With my son's guarantee. In my building. Possibly with my money. I said nothing. At the next Sunday dinner, Vanessa talked about the boutique openly. She was animated, glowing, more confident than I'd ever seen her. She talked about the location, the foot traffic, the incredible deal she'd gotten on the lease. She used the word blessed twice. She used the word hustle once. She looked across the table at me, and I could see it forming on her lips before she even said it. You should come by sometime, Elaine. Maybe I'll let you sell your little mangoes out front. She laughed. Vanessa's mother laughed. Marcus smiled, that thin, uncomfortable smile he'd been wearing for months, the one that told me he knew something was wrong but didn't have the spine to say what. I took a sip of water. I set the glass down. And I said, with the warmest smile I had, "That sounds lovely, dear." Later that week, Gerald sent me a notification. Vanessa's first rent payment was late. Not dramatically 4 days. But late. I noted it. I didn't act. I folded the notification into the file on my desk. The file was getting thick now, lease documents, guarantor records, property reports, build-out questions, a printout of that social media post. Everything in order. Everything patient. Everything waiting. The following Sunday, I chose my moment. The whole family was there. Marcus. Vanessa. Vanessa's parents, visiting again. The table was set beautifully. Vanessa always set a beautiful table. I'll give her that. Candles. Linen. Flowers. She was in high spirits, talking about expansion plans. A second location, maybe. A website. A brand. Then she turned to me. She tilted her head with that look, the one that's shaped like sympathy but built from condescension. And she said, "Elaine, honestly, if you ever want to do something real with your time instead of playing around with fruit, I could use someone to help with inventory at the shop." She paused, like she was being generous. Minimum wage, but it's honest work. The table laughed politely. Vanessa's mother nodded. Marcus looked at his plate. I set down my fork. I reached into my purse, which was hanging on the back of my chair. I pulled out a single manila folder, not thick, not dramatic. Just a clean folder with a few pages inside. I placed it on the table in front of Vanessa. She looked at it. "What's this?" "Your lease," I said quietly. "For Unit 214. At my shopping center." The room didn't go silent slowly. It went silent all at once, the way a room does when the air leaves it. Vanessa stared at me. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Vanessa's mother blinked. Her father shifted in his chair. I continued calmly, without raising my voice. I explained that I had owned the shopping center since 2003, purchased it with my late husband, Robert, and held solely in my name through our LLC since his passing. I explained that I had reviewed the lease for Unit 214 and confirmed that Marcus had signed as the personal guarantor. I mentioned that the first rent payment was 4 days late. I noted that the build-out modifications, the marble flooring, the structural changes to the interior, had not been formally submitted for approval through the proper channels, which was a lease violation. I spoke the way I've always spoken when it matters, with the patience of a woman who has spent decades reading contracts, managing tenants, and growing things from the ground up. I looked at Marcus. "You borrowed $40,000 from me 3 years ago. You never told me what it was for." "I think I know now." Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His eyes were red. I turned to Vanessa. She hadn't moved. The folder sat in front of her, untouched. "You called my fruit stand a little side hustle," I said. You told me I wasn't welcome to bring my food into this house. You seated me at the far end of the table at your dinner party and answered for me when your mother asked what I did. You put my mangoes by the recycling bin. And just now, you offered me minimum wage in a building I own. I paused. Not for effect, because I needed the breath. I'm not here to take your store. I'm not here to cancel your lease. I'm here to make sure you understand who you've been talking to. I stood up. I took my purse. I pushed my chair in. Before I walked through the door, I turned back one last time and looked at the table, at my son, at his wife, at her parents, at the beautiful place settings and the candles and the flowers, and I said, "The rent is due on the 1st. Don't be late again." Then I left. In the days that followed, Marcus called. He called the first night. He called the next morning. He called again that evening. I didn't answer. Not because I was punishing him. Because I needed silence more than I needed his panic. I answered on the 3rd day. He was emotional, stumbling over words. He said he didn't know I owned the building, and I believed him, which almost made it worse. It meant he had never cared enough to learn what his mother built. He'd grown up watching me work and never once asked what I was working on. He'd eaten at my table for 30 years and never once wondered how the table got there. He apologized. He cried. He said he was sorry about Vanessa, about the comments, about the fruit stand, about the money. He said he should have spoken up. I listened. And when he was done, I said, "I don't need your apology, Marcus. I need you to remember who raised you." Vanessa did not call. Not that day. Not the next week. Not ever. But the rent was paid on time the following month. And the month after that. And every month since. I heard through Gerald that Vanessa had been telling people she didn't know the situation and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. I didn't correct the story. I didn't need to. The people who matter know the truth. And the people who don't, well, they're not my tenants. Vanessa's parents stopped coming to Sunday dinners. That was fine. The table felt lighter without them. The following Saturday morning, I went back to my fruit stand. Sophie was already there when I arrived. She'd brought new signs, hand-painted, just like the old ones, but with brighter colors this time. She'd written Elaine's Garden across the top in green and gold. We sat up together in the early light. We arranged the mangoes in rows, the guavas in small baskets, the limes in cloth bags tied with twine. A woman I'd never seen before stopped by around 8:30. She picked up a mango, turned it in her hands, and said, "These are the most beautiful mangoes I've ever seen." I smiled. "Thank you. I grew them myself." You know, the world has a way of teaching women, especially older women, to take up less space. To smile when you're insulted and call it grace. To nod when you're dismissed and call it keeping the peace. To shrink yourself down so that the people around you don't have to adjust. I did that for too long. I confused silence with patience. I confused being kind with being small. And I let people who had never built anything tell me that what I built didn't matter. I don't hate Vanessa. I pity the kind of confidence that only works by standing on someone else. The kind that crumbles the moment it learns it's been standing on the wrong ground. I've spent my whole life growing things. Gardens. Buildings. A family. A son. Some of those things grew tall. Some of them still need more time. But the ones I planted with my own hands, the ones I watered every morning before the sun came up, those are the ones that lasted. And they always will.